Let's move on to wide receivers.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by this run recently in the last few drafts of how many good wide receivers have entered the league and been good right away. Like, you look at last year's draft class, Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams basically redshirted last year and still somehow managed to look dangerous. Jahan Dotson was way better than I thought he would be. Even Treylon Burks, like, a lot put on his shoulder, but when he was healthy,
he was way better than I thought he was going to be.
Christian Watson didn't do anything for the first half of the season, then really broke out with a ton of touchdowns. Even in the second round, guys like George Pickens, you can go quite deep into this draft. Like, Romeo Doubs was the guy getting all the preseason hype, didn't necessarily continue that, but was still dangerous. You go back a year, that's obviously Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Kadarius Toney didn't do anything with the Giants, but now looks devastating in limited action with the Chiefs. Bateman's been injured a lot. Elijah Moore has been that whatever weird thing is going on with the Jets. And then, you go back a year before that, okay, Henry Ruggs obviously is his own case, but Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman. Like, we've had this insane run of a lot of really good wide receivers and a pretty good strike rate. And these guys hitting the ground running like right away. First of all, what do you think is driving that instant success?
I do think that a lot of these wide receivers are a lot more ready for the NFL, because college, I feel like over the last couple of years, let's just say over the last 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, has become a lot more pass heavy, right? And I feel like you are seeing more advanced passing attacks in college. Like, you just have a lot of this, whether it's spread concepts, air raids, whatever you want to call it. A lot of these teams, they're living in a lot more 11 personnel, just getting more wide receivers out on the field. There are more wide receivers that are getting more experience on the field than I feel like have been in the past. So this is a building into them getting a ton of experience in college, and when they get to the NFL, it's not like this is all new to them. I feel like they're very used to being the man, like being the go-to guy. So that kind of target share isn't unfamiliar to them. And in fact, like, that's probably what they're used to, right? I feel like it would be worse for some of these guys to come into the NFL and it's like, all right, you were used to getting 10 targets a game at Ohio State or USC or Alabama or wherever it was. Now you're getting 1. And I feel like that's more of an adjustment than even getting a full-time load in the NFL is. Not to say there's not a learning curve when you're going up against different defenses, but I just feel like these guys are a lot more ready. And we're seeing it all the way back at the high school level too, right? You've seen the growth of 11-on-11s, these Elite 11 camps, these 7-on-7 camps, and like all this. And what are those doing? Those are developing skill players, particularly wide receivers. So even going back to high school, a lot of how recruiting is done now is much more friendly to developing these skill players, to where when they get on campus somewhere, especially a lot of these 4 or 5-star guys, they're expected to be able to play right away, and they can. And then all of a sudden, now you've got these guys who, juniors, might have 3 years of starting experience as like serious skill player guys at legit universities. It's not this 4-star guy who went into a smaller program who just happened to be the best wide receiver there. It's guys from Bama, from Ohio State, from all of these major college football programs. So I think that kind of goes into it. Is just, sure, we're seeing a increase of passing game everywhere, but it's always a trickle up effect. High school gives trends to college, which gives trends to the NFL. And I feel as though we are now at the point to where a lot of those big changes that have been happening in high school with high school offenses and recruiting camps has bled into college, and how colleges go about their offenses and how they utilize their star players. Now we're seeing more of those guys ready to contribute early at the NFL level.
It would be really interesting to go back, a number of years and sort of work out what the totality of snaps looks like for a wide receiver by the time they make it to the NFL now versus, 10, 20 years ago. Because with all these spread offenses, like, not only are they giving these guys more opportunities, but there's more wide receivers on the field at the same time, right? So even if you come in and for your first couple of years, freshman, sophomore, even if you're buried on the depth chart behind a couple of superstars that are heading to the NFL from the first round, you can still be the third guy running 25 snaps a game or running 25 routes a game in a way that probably wasn't an option 10, 20 years ago. Like, you would just be sitting on the bench watching this happen.
Right.
And then when that guy leaves, now you get to step up, and that's the first time we get to see if you can even do this anymore. But now those guys can almost apprenticeship from game. Like they can actually be running routes, developing, getting coached, presumably during the week, because the tape is still there. Even if you're not getting the ball because it's going to the first round superstar, somebody is still going, okay, here's what you need to work on. This was sloppy. This needs to be fixed, blah, blah, blah. It feels like these guys are reaching the point where by the time they get to the NFL, just the number of snaps they've played, the number of routes they've run is immeasurably more than it was in the past.
They're much more experienced now. Being a rookie does not mean the same thing today, especially for the skill position wide receiver, specifically for this conversation, than it did 10 years ago. It's just not the same conversation.
Right.
I think before, if you weren't a first round pick wide receiver, it was really hard to be a difference maker early on in your career. Now you got Amon-Ra St. Brown's drafted in the 4th round, and this dude is leading the Lions receiving corps.
Right.
Like he is the main passing weapon that they have. And I just don't think that was ever really a thing, at least to the extent that it is today. I agree with you.
Now, that being said, this does not sound like it is as good a wide receiver class as the last few. So in addition to just I think what we just talked about is absolutely real, and it is becoming easier and easier for wide receivers to enter the NFL and be successful right away. I think we've probably also seen a run of 3 or 4 very good wide receiver draft classes.
Yeah, we have. And it's not going to be as strong this year. I think depending on who your wide receiver 1 is, I think it's probably 3 different players that I've heard a lot. Quentin Johnston's the one from TCU that I hear a ton about being potentially wide receiver 1. Jordan Addison, the former Biletnikoff winner. We talked about this a little bit pre-show. The former Biletnikoff winner who's now at USC, Jordan Addison. He's a lot of people's wide receiver 1 as well. There's some love for Zay Jones from Boston College as a wide receiver 1.
Zay Flowers, right?
He's just, Zay Flowers. Who did I say? Zay Jones? Yeah, okay. Please don't let me mess that up because I'm going to a million times this draft season and I need somebody to beat it out of my head. Zay Flowers, where he's not built like a traditional wide receiver 1, but he gets a lot of production and he has a lot of separation ability, so I know a lot of people like him. But I think for Flowers to even be in the conversation as a potential wide receiver 1 in a class, unfortunately goes to show you where the ceiling of it is, especially compared to last year. I think whoever you have as wide receiver 1 in this year's class is probably wide receiver 6 at best in last year's group.
Now, people that listen to the podcast a lot will be familiar with Steve's model. Are you familiar with the model?
No, other than the hair making him look like a model. That's all I got. Are we talking about something else? Okay.
Steve has been creating his own sort of superstar like infinity gauntlet model that just folds in every piece of information in the known world and tells you whether a player is going to be good or not.
Sure.
So it's really, it's the holy grail of draft scouting.
Okay, great.
And
I'll stop watching tape and I'll just get with him then.
And he's been using this, across the board, every position. This is the model guy. This is not a model guy. The model doesn't like this guy. So he has sent me what is essentially a composite of the consensus board for wide receivers and the model. Right? So top right, the consensus board and the model likes these receivers. So Jordan Addison is there. Jackson Smith and Jigba is there. Josh Downs is there. Then the further left you go, but still up, it's the consensus board loves these guys. Model, not so much. Model doesn't like Quentin Johnston as much. He's middle of the pack for the model. Model doesn't like Zay Flowers even less.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then when you go down, but right, the model likes these guys, but the consensus board does not. So who have we got down here? We've got Kearis Jackson is the furthest guy in that quadrant. And then, bottom left is nobody likes him. Model, or I'm not even going to name those guys. I feel like to me.
Okay.
But the point is, if you're in that quadrant,
sure,
you stink.
I understand.
Everybody thinks you're bad.
Yes.
The model thinks you're bad, and the consensus board thinks you're bad. You have no shot, essentially. So I don't feel it's appropriate to name those people.
It's good on you.
Particularly because I yet don't know whether they're supposed to be good or not. So
right. It's right.
Literally taking a dump over some guy that's been told you're an undrafted free agent at best, sir. You might as well just get your education and then start sending some applications out.
Hey, education's never a bad thing.
No, it's fine. I'm just saying, those are not people you want to dump on a podcast. But anyway, I just think it's fascinating that those two guys, Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston, the model, we've yet to, really, I think, play out the efficacy of the model. But model doesn't like those guys as much as the rest.
It's again, like it's going to be a polarizing class in that regard, just because the league is so starving for passing game playmakers every year. We see so many come through, and yet every year there's always teams that could desperately use another playmaker. The New York Giants, right? The Baltimore Ravens, sure. Even the Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Cowboys, right? Like these are just teams that I just thought of on the top of my head where it's like, yeah, wide receiver. These teams need go-to wide receivers in the passing game. But this class, does it warrant a guy being a really high first-round pick in that regard? I don't know.
Doesn't this feel a little bit like last year, though, where there was a lot of conversation last year of there's no Jamar Chase in this draft, right? Which I think after a year is probably true. That being said, I mean, Garrett Wilson was pretty useful.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I think that's true. I'm not sure that Garrett Wilson has a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase type of ceiling to his game. But did it matter? Like, what he was able to do was still more than good enough for a team that was in need of wide receiver help.
I was going to say, man, you put Garrett Wilson either on another team or you just put him with a different quarterback, and I think that we're talking about a phenomenal year.
Oh, I agree.
He had a good year anyways, yeah. But just to go to your point, like if anybody was saying...
I was saying that, but like statistically, at one point, certainly very close to the end of the season, if you just stripped out non-Zach Wilson games, like he was on pace for a Jamar Chase season.
Right.
But I still think that like there's a difference. As much as I love Garrett Wilson, like he was my number one.
Everyone's still picking Jamar Chase over Garrett
he was my
Wilson.
number one receiver in that draft class.
Yeah.
I still think that like there are things Chase can do that he can't.
I think that Wilson had a phenomenal year, obviously, but I don't think anybody's taking him over Jamar Chase. Okay.
So, but my point being, like that was we heard a lot of that a year ago. You know what I mean? Like there's no Jamar Chase.
It's different this year. To I guess I see the conversation that you're kind of bringing up. It's definitely different.
Right.
Like last year, I think there were a lot of people that were going, "Oh, there's no all-pro rookie wide receivers," and that's like a crazy high bar to say.
Nobody's going to break the record this year.
Right. This year it's different. This year the bar is a lot lower for this wide receiver class.